We've got a post here from fly4props. Fly4props is started tuning on his own instead of using somebody else's PIDs. I think that's a great idea. In fact, I think that the desire to see other people's PIDs is a little bit overblown. If the reason that you want to see other people's PIDs is because you want to learn about sort of like I want to see other people's PIDs because I want to know that with PID controller 1, P gain for top pilots was given with a certain setup is usually between these ranges. And then I can recognize if I'm like way out of that range, or I can have kind of a baseline for where I want to start. But I don't ever copy other people's PIDs, and I realize I'm probably a special case here because I like tuning. I'm a tweaker all the time. I'm always trying to see what the effect of various things is, and not everybody likes that or has an aptitude for it. So, I get it. Probably copying somebody else's PIDs is better than the stock PIDs that came on it. But at the end of the day, nobody's got the same setup you do. And even if they have the exact same setup you do, they may not have a piloting style that you like. And so I think that there's a lot of value to be gained from learning to tune on your own so you can get the copter flying exactly how you want it to. Softer, sharper, whatever suits your flight style. And that's especially true if you don't have the exact really popular setup. If you've got a Vortex, then you just take one of the Pro Tunes and away you go, right? And it'll probably fly great. If you've got Warp Quad looks like it's getting very popular, and a lot of people are going to be flying the setup that Soma recommends, and probably a lot of people are going to be able to copy the setups, the PIDs of top pilots there. But if you look at top pilots, you'll find that they're constantly changing their tune. Uh, I think that's probably not universally true, but it's often true. And you can see that in the development of Betaflight, right? Boris is, I mean, and I'm picking on Boris here, but Boris is a very visible example. If you go back through his post history, and look at the various things he's posted, look at his YouTube videos, you'll see that it's a moving target. And oftentimes top pilots are constantly trying to hit a target, and or they're just inveterate tweakers and they're constantly changing things. So if you say, well, what were your PIDs? Well, maybe those were good PIDs, or maybe they were in the middle of trying to sort some tuning thing that they're trying to solve, and maybe they weren't good PIDs. I don't know. The fact that somebody flies an awesome video doesn't necessarily mean that their PIDs were fantastic. So anyway, do whatever makes you happy, obviously. But I obviously I believe, think there's a lot of benefit to learning to tune on your own. So congratulations, and also welcome to the frustrating world of tuning. Your tune looks pretty good. I looked at your video first of all, and I'll just focus on Blackbox, right? And we all want to look at the pretty graphs and dig into the graphs and find these deep insights, right? But at the end of the day, the very first thing I'm going to do whenever I look at my own tune or anybody else's tune is I'm just going to sit back and I'm going to watch your video. And if there are any problems, I mean, at the end of the day, you're flying FPV. When you're flying FPV, which most of us on this thread are, and frankly, most mini quad pilots are flying FPV. But then what matters is what the camera sees. If they've got some kind of an oscillation or a motor problem and the camera doesn't pick it up, at the end of the day, maybe it doesn't matter. And so I'll watch the video, and your video looks pretty good. I'm not gonna play a bunch of it because everybody can watch it themselves if they want. But your motor sounded smooth. I didn't hear any like bad oscillations or anything. I didn't see any oscillations really. Um, I thought that the tune, and I thought it looked and felt, if you can feel a tune by watching a video, but in my mind it felt a little bit soft. And I tried to think about what that really means. It has to do with how sharply the copter begins and stops moving when you make turns. And it is not a criticism, it's just a comment. It is very much a stylistic thing as to how much softness you want and how much sharpness you want. Some people find a very sharply tuned copter to be a little abrupt and maybe not enjoyable to watch or fly. So it felt a little bit soft, and in general, if something feels soft like that, the answer is slightly more P gain. So just keep that in mind. Excess eye gain can also give somewhat of a soft feel in a slightly different way. It's soft in that almost more stiff than soft. And again, we're using qualitative terms here, so it's a little bit hard to really communicate what I mean. But excess eye gain could cause the copter to enter and leave moves, to start and stop moves more reluctantly. With low P gain, the copter starts a move reluctantly because it's not pushing hard enough. And with excess I gain, it starts the move reluctantly because P is pushing hard, but I is holding it back. And those two things, they feel slightly different when you're flying, but in video they can look similar. Um, but my guess from looking at your tune, I looked at your flying PID controller 2, so we'll look at your float values here. Your pitch I is 30 and your roll I is 26, and neither of those is particularly high. So in fact, they're sort of right in the ballpark. So if there's a little bit of apparent softness, it's probably, I'm guessing, your P gains. But your P gains are not particularly low, especially if you're flying beta flight, which you are. So, so I don't know. Maybe you just have your rates turned down, and if you, I've just forgotten what it looks like when somebody's rates are turned down. But off the top of my head from looking at your video, I would say that if it were me, I would be thinking about whether my P gains could go higher. Especially, where from your flying looked a little bit, didn't look like hyper aggressive. So I'm guessing you're still sort of, you're not a total noob. Like your flying was very smooth. Your throttle control was pretty good. So you clearly have a little bit of experience under your belt, but you weren't, shredding either. So, maybe this is where you want to be for where you are in your flight style. I don't know. Let's take a look at your filters. And this is the default that Boris has gone with, gyro cut of 0, P-term cut of 40. And I think D-term cut, maybe you just have a slightly different version of the firmware. Your D-term cut is 10. I'm not sure if his default is 8. I, I'm not. This may be an example of a case where a pilot is like Boris is trying out something new and it works for him and he sets it to the default. Remember this is beta flight, so we're all beta testers here. It's nice that we get access to these new features, but also sometimes it means they're not the best. And I'm not 100% convinced that gyro cut of 0 is best for a lot of people. I mean, Boris tried it. Boris maybe likes it, or maybe a week from now, Boris will come back and say, nah, it didn't work out. But I'm not convinced that that's the best. If we go look at your, well, here's one example. I mean, I'm not even really looking at the gyro here. If we look here, though, I mean, your D term is clearly a lot of high frequency noise right here. I picked on this one example before I started recording. There's just a ton of high frequency noise here in your D term. And the thing is with it, oh, sorry, let me move that up slightly. There we go. With a D term cut of 10, your D term is really filtered. This is way higher frequency than that. And yet even with a D term cut of 10, there's just a ton of noise here. So it really feels like, now I've seen 3 examples in a row of people with gyro cut of 0, and it looked pretty noisy in all cases. I picked this example, I cherry picked. D term looks better in some places than others, but my gut is that's not optimal. And we're seeing a similar thing here with the P term. The P term has a lot of noise in it. I really think we should try a gyro cut of 100. Now you said that you picked a gyro cut of 60 and you got a ton of oscillations. Yeah, gyro cut of 60 is pretty low. It's not the lowest of the low, but especially if you've got a P-term cut of 40 and a gyro cut of 60, that's pretty filtered. And it's possible that your oscillations were actually related to your D term. I don't know. I don't have all the insight yet and maybe I never will, into exactly how these three things interact. But the fact that I know for a fact that gyro cut of 60, P-term cut of 40 is flyable on a lot of quads, a lot of copters. I've flown it myself. It got a little soft once I got P-term down to about 35. I think at one point I tried something like gyro 40, P-term 35. It got a little soft, and I bumped it back up again, but I didn't get oscillations. So if you're getting a ton of oscillations at gyro 60, I don't know, but you don't need to go to gyro 60. Try gyro 100. Even that should help tame this a little bit, and maybe raise D-term a smidge to try and make up for the additional latency there. Now, if we look at your gyros, it is interesting to me that your pitch axis is actually noisier, especially like right around here. I don't know what was happening here. Maybe this is some kind of an oscillation in your P term that's related to your throttle position, perhaps. It is really interesting to me that your pitch axis is noisier, by which I mean thicker line. Thicker line is more noise. Thinner line is less noise. Um, it's usually the case that the roll axis is noisier on a mini quad. That's interesting and curious, and I don't what that might be, but it's I don't know. That stands out to me. I don't have any conclusions or recommendations. It does stand out, and I would keep that in the back of my mind as I was trying to tune other stuff if it came up as relevant somehow. Here we are looking at some roll, and we can find some oscillations in here. We can always find oscillations in the P term. It's just the question is whether they're visible on the camera and in the motors. If we watch this playback, hang on. So we can see that oscillation here in the roll axis, we just don't see it in the camera or hear it in the motors. Let's play it back again. It's just not there. So this is an example, and here's some more. Let's keep listening and see if we can hear it or see it. You really don't see it, do you? It's just, and this is an example of where we can't let ourselves get so hypnotized by looking at these pretty graphs that we forget what's really important. So I think if I had to make a suggestion, I'd say that the number one thing I would try to do here is try different combinations of filter values. Even gyro cut 100, maybe 80, probably not higher. There's probably no point in having it higher than 100. Somewhere between 60 and 100 is probably, I think, the sweet spot for gyro cut. If you can get a good flying copter with gyro cut of 0 and just using P term and D term, Forrest has said apparently gotten some good results with that. That'll have less latency because you cut one of the filters out. But bear in mind that as I've said before, going from gyro cut of 0 to gyro cut of 100 it's something like 2 milliseconds of delay, which, okay, that's 2 whole loops at 1,000 loop time. But on the other hand, it's 2 freaking milliseconds, right? Whereas having that D term filter all the way down in the 8-10 range, that's like 20 milliseconds. So if you can get good result, if you can allow yourself to bump your D term up from 8 to 9 to 10, you've made back maybe 5 milliseconds. At which point you can certainly afford to knock your gyro cut down a little bit and maybe get better results overall. Uh, nothing like huge jumps out to me though about your tune, other than the filtering, which is I think just an issue with the current default values in Betaflight. If anything, I would say maybe start notching your P gains up a little bit to see where the oscillation point is. You're flying really smooth and not very sharp. And if you want a little bit sharper feel and maybe a little bit more locked in feel, I can't feel and see what's going on inside your brain and your hands to know how sloppy this copter feels. The fact that it looks a little bit soft in some of the moves means that maybe you would get a more locked in feel with a little bit more P gain. But it looks great. One of the rolls you did looks great. There's no oscillation, no bounce. So I think you're nowhere near excess P gain. And if you want to try and tweak it a little more, bring it up. But overall, I think you're really in the ballpark. Don't yeah, you're really in the ballpark. I think you have a pretty good flying copter here. And you also have a beautiful home. You have a beautiful home. I love your home. Also, I'm sure you get that a lot. So happy flying and happy tuning. Welcome to the club.